During this Advent season, we are doing Bible reading challenge with the Gospel of Matthew. Today is the first day. We begin with chapter 1, and you will read one chapter a day, that you will finish Matthew by December 22nd. So in order to help your reading and understanding for each chapter of Matthew, I will upload this chapter by chapter study guide to our church Facebook page. So today we will explore Matthew chapter 1. Because this is our first chapter we are beginning, let us start with the instruction to the Gospel of Matthew, just briefly. First, who is the author? Who wrote this Gospel? Yes, Matthew wrote this Gospel, and then he is one of Jesus' 12 disciples. He was a tax collector before following Jesus. Tax collectors at the time did not have a good reputation because they were kind of oppressing people by asking them unreasonable amounts of tax to pay. And they were involved with corruption, something like that. Therefore, it was weird that Jesus called him as his disciple, but it shows the amazing grace of Jesus. Friends, Jesus did not come to call someone righteous already. No, but he came to make us righteous with his grace. This is important because it shows how Jesus can change anyone's life. There is no bigger sin than the grace of Jesus Christ. Next, main audience. Who was the main audience? To whom Matthew wrote this gospel? It was mainly for Jewish Christians. For Jewish people, the Old Testament, especially first 5 books in the Old Testament, were very important because they considered it as a foundation of their faith in God. The first 5 books are called Torah, or the Law of Moses. Therefore, when Matthew was writing this gospel for Jewish people, he knew that those Jewish people were very familiar with the first 5 books in the Old Testament. For this reason, the Gospel of Matthew contains many references to the Old Testament. Likewise, Matthew wanted to show them that Jesus was the promised Messiah mentioned in those books that they had been waiting for. So key points to remember in this book are like this. The Gospel of Matthew shows Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, fulfilling the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies. Because this was written for Jewish people, Jewish Christians, it contains a lot of references from the Old Testament as well. This is just a brief instruction to the Gospel of Matthew. And let us go into chapter 1. Chapter 1 can be divided into 2 parts. First, it shows about Jesus' genealogy. And the second part is about the birth of Jesus. First part, the genealogy of Jesus. Someone might wonder, why is this genealogy important? Again, this Gospel of Matthew was written for Jewish people, the Christians having Jewish background. And genealogy was very important to them and their tradition. Therefore, Matthew shows Jesus' genealogy in the very first part of chapter 1. It confirms that Jesus has the right family background to be the Messiah. Qualification. Yes, Jesus is the right one who has qualification according to your tradition. That's how Matthew was kind of expressing in this chapter. Matthew was telling Jewish people, like, you consider genealogy something very important. Yes, Jesus is exactly the Messiah you have been waiting for. That is what Matthew is saying. Now let us look at the story of Jesus' birth. It is an amazing story, but for Mary and Joseph, it was a weird and dangerous situation. Verse 18 tells us that Mary, who was engaged to Joseph, became pregnant through the Holy Spirit. This was a difficult and dangerous situation because people could think Mary was unfaithful to Joseph during their engagement. Let us think about Joseph's feelings. Before their marriage, Mary became pregnant without him. At the time, in this case, Joseph could have made this news in public and finished their relationship and put Mary to public punishment. However, verse 19 shows us that Joseph was a kind man. So when he thought Mary had been unfaithful, he planned to end their relationship quietly to protect her from public punishment. But then something unexpected but wonderful happened. In verse 20 and 21, an angel appears to Joseph in a dream and explains that this baby is from God, the Holy Spirit. The angel tells Joseph to give the baby named Jesus, which means the Lord saves. And what is also amazing is that Joseph trusted what the angel told him. Joseph was the person of faith. He believed the angel of God and took Mary as his wife. The situation around him didn't make sense to him in human understanding, but he trusted the message of God through his angel and took the situation as God's plan, embraced that situation, unfair situation for him as God's plan. I pray that all those who participate in this Bible study trust God's message given to each of you through the Bible. Let us trust that it's from God. This Bible is not just a religious book. No, this is the book of promise as we believe. This is Matthew chapter 1. We just got to explore what this chapter speaks about, Jesus' genealogy and the birth of Jesus. Then what is more important is to discern and pray about what does God want to tell me through the biblical stories. This is very important, to discern God's heart and his promise for us. To help your discernment, let me share a couple of points. In verse 2, it tells about Judah, the son of Jacob. Who was Judah? He was the one who slept with his daughter-in-law by mistake. However, what is surprising is that David came from this family line. What is more surprising is that Jesus also came from this family line. Judah, who slept with his daughter-in-law by mistake, became an ancestor of King David and Jesus the Messiah. Even when Judah made mistakes like this, God recovered the human brokenness and fulfilled his plan. God is the one who makes our worst into his best. God is mighty God, who can transform any situation for good. This doesn't mean we can do whatever we want to do. We can make any mistakes because God will fix it. No. However, when we feel like we are helpless, powerless, when we feel like we are no good at all, worthless, God can bring restoration and recovery. His grace is not just a grace, but amazing grace. It is the same with Mary and Joseph's situation. Their lives were turned upside down, but they trusted God. Things didn't make sense to them at all. They were in a dangerous situation in the society. However, they put their trust in God and moved on by trusting the goodness of God. In the very same way, when things do not make sense in our lives, we can remember their example. Matthew chapter 1 is not just a list of names or a birth story. It's a proof that God keeps his promises and works through ordinary people to do extraordinary things. The same God who worked through Jesus' family line is still working in our lives today. Let us trust in the goodness of God. We will explore Matthew chapter 2. Chapter 2 speaks about Jesus' early life. This chapter shows how God protected the baby Jesus and fulfilled his promises through challenging situations. In this chapter 2, we can see wise men visiting Jesus. Who are these wise men? They were not Jewish people, but they came from far away following a star in the heaven. It means that Jesus came to this world not only for Jewish people, no, but for all people in the world. Jesus came to this world for each of us living in Kansas. Jesus died for each of us living in this 21st century. So when Jesus was born, his family needed to run away to Egypt. In the middle of night, Joseph took Mary and baby Jesus to Egypt. Think about this situation. It was not easy to travel such a long distance with a newborn baby. However, Joseph trusted God and obeyed immediately. When God guides us, sometimes it's not easy to follow. We know we need to follow his guidance, but sometimes we feel like, oh, it's not easy. It's difficult. We are not ready. But friends, when we trust and obey like Joseph, our lives are guided to the best place and best situation we can ever be. Then we see something very sad next part. King Herod killing all baby boys in Bethlehem. This shows how evil can try to stop God's plan. We believe that the plan of God and his promises will be fulfilled. However, there are moments that disappoint us, frustrate us, and make us wanting to give up. However, let us remember this. As Christians, we are not always walking through just comfortable and cozy ways. But David confesses like this. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, his rod and his staff, they comfort me. Likewise, there are many stories in the Bible that biblical figures receive the promise of God walking together with them. God promised Abraham to be with him. Moses, Joshua, David, Daniel, Mary, and Joseph. Throughout the Bible, God continually tells his people, don't worry, do not fear. I am with you. I will be with you. I am walking with you. In life situations that make us disappointed and frustrated, please remember the promise of God that Mary and Joseph experience in this chapter. Let us finish up this chapter. The last part shows the family of Jesus returning to Nazareth. Here again, we can see God guided them in his timing and his way. The angel of God appeared to Joseph and told him, this is the right time to return to Israel for Joseph and his family. I pray that all of you participating in this Bible study experience the guidance of God in your real life situations. As you open your hearts, come closer to him by reading the Bible and praying, the more and clearer you will experience his guidance. God is leading you. He is guiding you. He is protecting you, and he is making you have fruit in your lives. God is the one who always fulfills his promises, even through hardships. Again, the Bible is not just a religious book. This is the book of promise. So when we face difficult situations, when we need to trust God's guidance, when things seem hard, these stories show us that God is always working to fulfill his promises in our lives. Let us trust him.